My uncle left his entire fortune to whoever solved his riddle, and our family tore itself apart trying. My garden gives all of its wealth to anyone who can split it, so that our family becomes rich. That's the line that started it all. My Uncle Garrett was eccentric, reclusive, and obscenely wealthy. While we toiled through life with mortgages and maxed-out credit cards, he lived alone in a 7-bedroom mansion with a climate-controlled wine cellar, a garage full of exotic cars, and a goat named Aristotle that he called his business partner. Garrett made his fortune in early tech ventures, somehow predicting cryptocurrency years before the world knew what it was. When he died suddenly at 52, we half expected him to donate his fortune to charity or burn it all out of spite. But instead, we got summoned to his lawyer's office, where his will began with a scorched earth greeting. To the relatives who only called when they needed money, and who treated me like a thief for decades, you now have a chance to prove you're worth more than your mistakes. Break my riddle. Take everything I've built, fail, and watch it all turn to ash. Each of us received an envelope. Inside was a single phrase. Where shadows dance but do not shed light. Where loneliness screams all night. Where memories of life but time stops. And a single key. At first, we acted like a family. We speculated, brainstormed, shared ideas. Patricia, my aunt, suggested his old darkroom. My cousin Dylan swore it was the server room he used to tinker in. I was sure it was the underground grape cellar. Finn, who believed himself the smartest of us all, suggested the junkyard. For 3 weeks, we tore through his house like looters with gloves. We pulled up floorboards, tapped on walls for hollows dug behind bookshelves. No clue. That's when it all started to rot. Patricia hired a private investigator. Dylan bribed the old housekeeper for secrets. My mother started showing up before dawn. Finn installed secret cameras to spy on us all. And then Patricia found it, a hidden compartment under Garrett's antique bed. Inside was a metal lockbox. She tried to keep it to herself, but Finn had everything on camera. The next morning, he played it back for everyone on his laptop like a reality show villain. The box held a second riddle, Polaroids from our childhood, and a handwritten note. Only one of you deserves this fortune. The rest will get exactly what they deserve. It wasn't signed, but we all recognized Garrett's neat cursive, the same he used on birthday cards that always came with crisp $100 bills. The photos hit like sucker punches. There was the old lake house, our childhood summer home. The dorm room above a pizzeria where Garrett taught himself to code. The dusty carnival ride he worked at in high school. Then one photo made Patricia physically recoil. A warehouse. Our grandfather's old place. A place of stories and secrets. The place Garrett swore never to return. It took us 43 minutes to get there. A rusted building on 15 acres of useless land. But the lock turned cleanly. Inside was nothing like I remembered. It was renovated top to bottom. Bright lights, fresh paint, insulated walls. In the center, 5 chairs. 5 manila envelopes. One for each of us. And cameras in every corner. Inside my envelope, a final note from Garrett. Personal. Devastating. A truth I'd carried quietly for years. Patricia had lied. When Dylan was 8, he fell through a broken floorboard in that very warehouse. Broke both legs. Nearly bled out. Garrett, just 13, had jumped in after him. Saved his life. But Patricia twisted the story. Told everyone Garrett pushed him. Fed us a lie so rehearsed that we never questioned it. For 15 years, our family treated him like a danger. A disgrace. And the cameras were recording as we opened those letters. As the truth dropped like bricks in our laps. Garrett's voice played over the speakers. You let a lie shape your view of me. You never asked questions. You never defended me. Now, here's what that cost you. Patricia's letter offered her $15 million on 2 conditions. She must confess publicly to everyone she'd lied to. And she must spend the rest of her life running a foundation for children wrongly accused. Dylan's letter was gentler. $2 million and an apology. You were worth saving. You always were. I'm sorry it took this long for you to hear that. Finn, who was 5 when it happened, got $50,000 in this note. You're old enough to ask better questions now. Do better than we did. Mine? $3 million. Because I never believed Patricia entirely. Because I kept asking, even when I was told to let it go. Because I knew the truth mattered. And then my mother. Her letter said, a mother who defends one child but abandons another deserves no fortune and no forgiveness. For the first time in her life, she cried in front of all of us. Real tears. Not performance. The camera recorded it all. Then Garrett's voice returned. This recording will go live in 1 hour unless Patricia confesses. Your silence will no longer protect you. What happened next? Patricia confessed. We rebuilt. Slowly. Awkwardly. But truth is a good place to start. The foundation she created now helps hundreds of wrongly accused children every year. And I travel, telling this story. Sharing how one riddle broke our family apart, and how the truth finally put it back together. I didn't plan on becoming the custodian of Garrett's truth. But when the cameras stopped blinking and the final message ended, something shifted in me. In all of us, maybe. Patricia sat slumped in her chair like the wind had been knocked out of her. Her mascara smeared in thick rivers, mouth slightly open. No one moved. Not for several minutes. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above us, the dry crackle of someone's envelope sliding to the floor. Then Dylan stood. He walked over to Patricia, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal, and crouched beside her. He didn't scream. Didn't curse. Just said, "You could have let me die." Patricia looked up. I didn't know. You did, he replied. You just didn't care. Her eyes searched his face for mercy she hadn't earned. I was a kid. I didn't understand what it would become. You understood enough to lie. That's when Mom stood too. The first thing she said wasn't to Dylan or Patricia. It was to the nearest camera. My name is Rebecca Tan. I failed both of my sons. Her voice cracked, fragile and breathy, but she didn't stop. I believed the easier story. The one that made dinner less awkward. That kept the peace. I ignored the truth because I didn't want to believe Patricia was capable of that. She wiped her cheek. I buried one son emotionally for 15 years. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to say it out loud. Garrett, I'm sorry. Her confession was the floodgate. Finn broke next. Then Dylan. Then me. But Patricia? She didn't cry again. She just sat quietly, rereading her letter. 2 weeks later, the first video went public. Not the footage from the warehouse, but a direct-to-camera video of Patricia. She was seated against a bare wall, wearing a navy blue sweater. No makeup. No excuses. I'm Patricia Tan, she began. And I spent 15 years maintaining a lie that nearly destroyed my cousin's life. I did it out of jealousy and cowardice. And I'm ready to fix what I broke. The internet devoured it. Within 48 hours, the Garrett Tan Foundation for Falsely Accused Youth raised its first $150,000. Within 6 months, it had over 20 full-time staff, pro bono lawyers, social workers, and a board that included Dylan and myself. Dylan donated all of his inheritance. He said, Garrett didn't save me so I could hoard money. He saved me so I could be better. Finn went back to college. Switched his major to forensic psychology. Said he wanted to understand what makes people believe lies over truth. As for me, I became the Foundation's public voice. Traveled. Spoke at conferences. Told Garrett's story over and over until I could do it without breaking down. But the final surprise came exactly 1 year later. A package arrived at my office. No return address. Just a leather-bound journal, a gold key, and a handwritten letter. If you're reading this, then you chose truth over comfort. Garrett told me about you. Told me how you never stopped asking questions, even when it hurt. He was proud of you. So am I. The letter was signed by Thomas Tan, Garrett's estranged half-brother from our grandfather's first marriage. A man none of us had ever met. Inside the journal? A map. A deed to a cabin in Montana. And photos of Garrett smiling like I'd never seen him. Real smiles. Not the awkward family smile for the camera kind, but genuine ones. Thomas had been watching from afar. He knew everything. The betrayal. The exile. The riddle. The redemption. The last line in the letter read, Some family traditions should die, but some stories deserve to begin again. I booked a flight to Montana the next morning. I landed in Bozeman just after dawn. The sky was pale orange, stretching wide and clean over Montana's horizon. I drove alone for nearly 2 hours, winding through pine-covered hills and deep, silent valleys. The address from the journal led me to a gravel road that didn't appear on Google Maps. And at the end of it, nestled in a clearing surrounded by mountains, stood the cabin. It wasn't what I expected. Not some spooky, secret lair. It was peaceful, like someone had built a sanctuary away from all the noise. A wooden sign over the door simply read, The Ledger. The gold key worked perfectly. I stepped into a space that smelled like cedar and old leather. The cabin was warm, lived in, the kind of place where stories live in the wood grain. And on every wall? Photographs. Dozens. Hundreds. Garrett with Thomas. Garrett with villagers in Thailand. Garrett at 19. working late at a dimly lit desk covered in cables and blueprints. There were pictures of people I didn't know, smiling women with children, elderly couples beside newly installed solar panels, young men clutching diplomas. Every single one of them had a note pinned below in Garrett's handwriting. Helped fund her first school. He fixed our roof and taught my son how to repair engines. Loaned him $2,000 to escape an abusive job. I staggered back. The scope of it. Garrett hadn't just built Access Path. He built lives. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without anyone ever knowing. On a small table in the center of the room was another letter. My name. My handwriting. Except I hadn't written it. Inside, a final message. From Garrett. You were always the one watching. Not judging. Just seeing what was actually there. This place is yours now. Not for inheritance, but for legacy. Keep it alive. Keep the story honest. Below it, a sketch. The original riddle. Where shadows dance but do not shed light. Where loneliness screams all night. Where memories of life but time stops. Only this time, he'd scribbled something underneath. It was always the warehouse. But it was also the truth. Truth is the garden that grows when you split the silence. I sat down. Let the silence settle around me. I didn't cry. Not this time. Because this wasn't grief. It was a beginning. The cabin stayed with me. Even after I flew home, after the press attention died down, after the foundation settled into something like routine, I kept thinking about that place. About Garrett. About the pictures pinned to those cedar walls like silent testaments to a life no one ever truly saw. Something had shifted in me that day in Montana. Not just the understanding that Garrett had quietly touched more lives than most of us ever would, but something deeper. A seed. A sense that I hadn't finished his story. That maybe, in some strange way, I was supposed to continue it. Back home, I started digging. Not into Garrett's finances. Into his life. I found a box of old cassette tapes in the garage of my mother's house. Labeled in that same sharp handwriting. Newark Interviews 1998, Phase 1. Solar Kits, Kuala Lumpur, 2002. Hours of tape. Garrett's voice on every one. Some were interviews, some were just him thinking aloud into a recorder. Late nights. Half-baked ideas. Desperate prayers. Laughter. Tears. He talked to himself the way most people talk to therapists. And in those ramblings, I found gold. One tape. Dated 2006. The year he disappeared from our lives. If they ever hear this, he says, breathing heavy, I hope they know I wasn't running away. I was just tired of shouting into silence. I was tired of being a villain in someone else's story. So I wrote my own. Quietly. In the margins. Another pause. Then. Truth is the most painful thing you can give someone who's addicted to comfort. But if you do it gently enough, they might stay. They might even thank you. I sat in the garage, in a camp chair surrounded by spider webs and dust, and cried. Not for Garrett. For all of us. Because the more I listened, the more I realized the inheritance was never money. Not even legacy. It was discomfort. Unearthed shame. A challenge to become someone better than we were before. And just as that realization was settling in, the phone rang. It was Dylan. I need you to see something, he said. An hour later, I was in his apartment. He'd been cleaning out old email accounts, the ones tied to our grandfather's estate, some of Garrett's old server backups. He found a login. A portal. The ledger isn't just a cabin, he said. It's a system. I stared at his monitor. A database. Encrypted. Over 900 entries. Names. Locations. Notes. Donations. Volunteer logs. This is how he kept track of them all, Dylan whispered. All the people he helped. But there was more. At the bottom of the screen, a blinking icon. Unfinished cases. 17 entries. We opened the first. A woman in Albuquerque. Wrongfully evicted after reporting a slumlord. 2 kids. Living in a shelter. Garrett had wired money. Connected her to legal aid. But the case was unresolved. Entry after entry. Names. Photos. Timelines. Garrett had started something. He just never lived long enough to finish. Dylan looked at me. We could finish it. I said nothing. Just stared at the screen. My uncle's quiet revolution glowing pixel by pixel. This was the real riddle. Not how to claim a fortune. How to use it. We called it the continuation list. Dylan and I started with the 17 unfinished entries. We created a private workspace inside the Foundation's digital infrastructure, imported the encrypted files, and built a roadmap. A roadmap not to treasure, but to truth, to dignity. We weren't saviors. We weren't saints. But we had Garrett's voice in our heads, his notes in our hands, and a moral debt to pay. The first case we reopened was Vanessa Delgado's, a single mother of two. Her former landlord had burned her belongings in retaliation for a lawsuit she'd filed. Garrett had covered her legal costs for the first round, but the appeals drained her. She lost custody of one child temporarily due to housing instability. We hired a new legal team, paid for trauma counseling, helped secure transitional housing. Within 6 months, she had both children back, a new job, and a restraining order that finally stuck. The second case was harder. Miguel Rojo, wrongfully terminated from a tech startup in San Jose, accused of stealing code. Garrett had believed in him. There was even a signed statement in the files from another employee who later recanted out of fear. Miguel had spiraled. Substance use. Mental health episodes. He wasn't ready to be helped. Not yet. But we didn't abandon him. We sent someone. A caseworker. Quiet, consistent visits. Food deliveries. A therapist who didn't judge. 3 months in, Miguel sent an email. Subject line, "Is it too late to come back?" We replied, "Never." By case 7, we had a team. Social workers. Legal consultants. Trauma specialists. People who read Garrett's riddle and said, "I get it now." But word got out. Stories were spreading. Not in the news. In whispers. Online forums. Survivor groups. People Garrett had helped started showing up. Sending letters. Emails. Testimonies. He gave me my first laptop when I was homeless. He paid for my mother's surgery in Thailand. He saved my life. We started receiving packages. Photos. Letters written by Garrett, postmarked years earlier, all timed to arrive on birthdays, anniversaries, turning points. He had orchestrated an entire afterlife of support. It wasn't charity. It was architecture. Legacy as infrastructure. One letter was addressed to me. It was mailed through a third-party holding firm. Inside, only one sentence. When you build something in silence, you protect it from the noise. And then, a single GPS coordinate. Dylan and I flew out 3 days later. Rural Oregon. A forest compound surrounded by trees older than any city we knew. There, we found the last piece of Garrett's story. A physical archive. Folders. Notebooks. Handwritten ledgers. Voice memos. Backup drives. A library of kindness. He had documented every donation, every visit, every correspondence. Not to boast, but to teach. As if he knew someday someone would need a blueprint. We stayed there a week, cataloging. We cried. We laughed. We argued. But most of all, we read. And in one notebook, labeled simply, "If they choose to continue," we found the instructions. Not legal documents. Not orders. An invitation. If you're reading this, then you refuse to leave the garden untended. You split the silence. You listened when no one else did. The final line. Now, go help them do the same. We shut the notebook. Looked at each other. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It never was. Some people build companies. Garrett built possibility. After Oregon, everything changed. We no longer worked from a foundation office in a converted bank building. We built hubs. Quiet spaces tucked into communities that needed them most. A mother's living room in Tulsa became a legal advice center on Wednesdays. An old bookstore in Newark turned into a job readiness clinic. A defunct taco stand in San Antonio, yes, really, became a healing space for teens aging out of foster care. And people started showing up, not because we paid them, because they'd heard the story. The man who wrote riddles instead of resumes, who planted questions instead of statues, who left a fortune not in cash, but in consequences. I was asked to speak at a TEDx event that winter. My hands trembled the entire time, but I told them the truth. My uncle left his wealth to whoever solved his riddle, but it wasn't really a riddle. It was a test of conscience, of memory, of courage. It didn't ask if we were clever. It asked if we were ready to change. The talk went viral. 2 million views. Then 5. Then a school in Detroit wrote asking for help designing their curriculum around Garrett's model. Then a city council in Fresno adopted our method into their urban renewal grants. Then a team of young coders in Nairobi replicated access path as structure for maternal care networks. We watched Garrett's ripple become a wave. But success is never simple. Not when it touches real lives. I got a call from Patricia 6 months later. We hadn't spoken since the night her confession aired. "Can I come see the Oregon archive?" she asked. I want to see what he left behind. I told her yes. But I didn't expect what happened next. She brought her daughter, Emily, 14, smart, cautious, the kind of kid who watches before speaking. While Patricia stood in the archive, silently flipping through Garrett's handwritten notes, Emily sat beside me on the porch. She asked one question: why did Uncle Garrett forgive her? I didn't have an easy answer. I don't know if he did, I said, but he left her the choice to try. That's something. Emily nodded slowly. Then she asked, what if she messes it up again? I looked at this girl, more honest than any adult in our family had been at her age, and said, then we clean up the mess. Again. That's what family should do. Not hide the cracks. Fill them. That night, Patricia stood in the doorway of the archive. I read the notebook labeled failure log, she said. I blinked. I didn't even know we had that one. She held it up. Every time someone turned him down. Every attempt that went nowhere. Every partner who stole. Every mistake he made. He wrote them all down. She smiled sadly. And next to everyone, he wrote what he learned. How he tried again. Better. I exhaled. Maybe Garrett hadn't needed revenge. Maybe he needed restoration. And Patricia? She began again. She stepped down from her executive role in the foundation and took a field job instead. Outreach. Face-to-face work. The kind that doesn't come with applause. She drove a battered sedan with a Garrett quote taped to the glove box. Truth is the long road, but it's the one worth walking. Sometimes I'd see her at events, standing quietly in the back, letting others speak. Redemption doesn't always come with a microphone. Sometimes it looks like showing up after you've been disinvited. Sometimes it sounds like silence, finally used for listening. And sometimes it smells like that cedar-sweet Oregon air, where we keep a light on in the archive, just in case someone else is ready to continue the story. My uncle left his entire fortune to whoever solved his riddle, and our family tore itself apart trying Part 7. The Oregon Archive became more than a storage space. It became a pilgrimage. We didn't advertise it. We didn't add it to any website. But people found it. A social worker from Boise, a librarian from Atlanta, a woman from Kuala Lumpur who said, in broken English, he once wrote to me when I was thinking of ending everything. He didn't know me, but he saved me. We gave them tea, blankets, silence, and a notebook to write their own story in. We called it the continuation ledger. Garrett had started his garden with code and solitude. We tended it with human hands, open ears, and relentless commitment. Not everyone stayed. Some came, read, cried, and left. Some stayed for a weekend, others for months. Some stories hit harder than others. Like Malik. He was 17 when he first emailed the foundation. Said he had seen the TEDx talk. Said he thought Garrett's riddle was stupid. But also, he couldn't stop thinking about it. His message ended with, is there any space for someone who hasn't done anything yet? We told him, you don't have to have done something. You just have to be willing to begin. Malik came to Oregon that summer. He had no degree, no formal training. But within 2 weeks, he rebuilt the foundation's intake system from scratch. He coded in silence, just like Garrett once did. But every now and then, he'd ask a question none of us saw coming. Why don't we document failure more clearly? Or, what happens when we help someone who doesn't want to be helped? Or even, what if legacy is a trap, and all Garrett really wanted was to be forgotten as a myth and remembered as a man? We didn't always have answers, but we let those questions guide us. Malik stayed, became our youngest board member by 21. He wrote a piece called Legacy Maintenance in the Age of Noise. It went viral in academic circles. And still, we grew. The continuation ledger had over 3,000 entries. Stories of redemption, of failure, of stubborn hope. One day, I found a letter at my desk. No return address. Just a familiar sharp scrawl. To the one who watched. Thank you. For keeping it honest. For refusing to sanitize the pain. The story was never about inheritance. It was about interruption. You interrupted the lie. I flipped it over. One last line. If they ever ask what my riddle meant, tell them, it meant don't stop. Even when the light fails. Even when the path folds in on itself. Even when family breaks you. Keep going. The garden needs tending. No signature. But I didn't need one. I placed it in the archive. Next to the first riddle. Next to the failure log. Next to Patricia's confession, now framed not as shame, but as proof that people can change. I closed the ledger for the day. And as the sun filtered through the Oregon trees, I whispered back to Garrett. We didn't stop. And we won't. My uncle left his entire fortune to whoever solved his riddle, and our family tore itself apart trying part 8. It ended where it started, in a kitchen. 10 years had passed since Garrett's funeral. Since the dinner where my family nearly erased me with a glance. Since Patricia clutched a stolen envelope and our legacy cracked open like a fault line. Now, I stood over a stove, stirring chai in a clay pot, while Dylan chopped apples beside me. His kids laughed in the next room. Real laughter, not the brittle kind we once faked over dry turkey. Finn sat on the porch, balancing his psychology books on one knee and his youngest on the other. He still quoted Garrett in lectures. My mother, yes, my mother was planting daffodils out front. She'd insisted. Said every story needs something that blooms. And Patricia? She arrived late. On purpose. Quiet as always now. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, and she didn't dye it. Didn't pretend anymore. Emily helped her in with a large box. Inside, letters. More entries for the continuation ledger. Stories Patricia had gathered by hand. Places she had traveled. Apologies she had collected. She laid the box down on my dining room table and looked at me. I still don't know if I deserved the chance he gave me. I poured her a cup of chai. None of us did. We just didn't waste it. We sat, talked, remembered. Then Emily asked, what would Garrett say if he saw all this now? We went quiet. Dylan chuckled. He'd probably roll his eyes and say, took you long enough. Finn added, and then hand us another riddle. We laughed. But Emily looked serious. No, I think he'd say something else. Something simple. She picked up a framed quote from the mantel, the one Garrett had written by hand and left in a notebook none of us found until you're 7. Tell the story. Even when it's messy. Especially then. That quote now hangs in every one of our satellite offices. Not for clients. For us. Because Garrett knew what we took too long to learn. Stories don't just heal. They hold us accountable. They remind us that truth costs something. That silence is never neutral. That every riddle worth solving leads not to riches, but to responsibility. We finished the chai. Then Patricia did something none of us expected. She took out a new envelope. This one wasn't yellowed with age or stamped with mystery. It was crisp, clean, labeled in Emily's handwriting. To the next generation. Inside, a letter, a list, a question. Who do we become when no one is watching? Emily looked around the room. At us. At her mother. At the stories that brought us here. And she said, it's time we stopped tending Garrett's garden and started planting our own. That night, I went out back. The stars above Oregon were velvet and old. The air smelled of cedar and firewood. I sat beneath a tree we had planted years ago with soil from the original warehouse site. And I opened a fresh notebook. Page 1. My name is Michael. Once, I was a disappointment. Then I became a witness. Now, I am the keeper of a story that taught me what legacy really means. I wrote until the moon tilted west. And when I ran out of words, I didn't close the notebook. I left it open. Because someone else will pick up the pen. They always do.